For nearly 3 years, the grand mansion on Hawthorne Hill had become infamous among job seekers. People whispered about the paralyzed millionaire who lived there, a man whose wealth was only matched by his impossible temperament. Assistants walked in confidently and walked out defeated, some after a single shift, others not even making it through lunch. Every corner of the mansion seemed to hold the echo of someone quitting in frustration. When Daniel arrived that morning, the guard at the gate raised an eyebrow and muttered that he'd probably be gone before sunset, just like everyone else. Daniel forced a smile, though nerves twisted in his stomach. He wasn't here because he wanted this job, he was here because he needed it. Rent was weeks overdue, his daughter Lily's school had sent another fee reminder, and every bill on his kitchen counter felt heavier than the last. Losing another opportunity wasn't an option for him anymore. Inside, the mansion felt cold and silent, the kind of silence that made a man feel unwelcome before he even met its owner. A middle-aged housekeeper led him to a wide study with tall windows and heavy curtains. In the center sat Mr. Raymond Hale in his motorized wheelchair, his posture stiff, his expression carved from stone. His sharp eyes scanned Daniel as if dissecting him. There was no greeting, no warmth, only a tension thick enough to cut through. Hale finally spoke, his voice low and edged with bitterness, telling Daniel that he doubted he would stay longer than the others, that people always walked away once they realized how demanding he was. Daniel swallowed hard, steadying himself before answering. He looked directly at Hale and introduced himself simply, explaining that he was a single father trying to make an honest living, and that he didn't have the luxury of quitting when things got difficult. Hale studied him for a long moment, the air heavy between them, and something flickered in his gaze, an unreadable spark, almost questioning whether Daniel meant the words he spoke. The first few days tested Daniel in ways he hadn't been prepared for. Hale kept a strict routine and expected everything to be executed with absolute precision, from the temperature of his morning tea to the exact alignment of the books on his desk. Any deviation, even one Daniel didn't notice, resulted in a sharp remark or a cold glare that made the air feel 10 degrees colder. On the second morning, when Daniel arrived 1 minute past the scheduled time because of traffic, Hale tapped his watch and said nothing else. The silence was worse than yelling. Daniel apologized and moved on with the day, refusing to let frustration win, but inside he felt the familiar pressure of failure creeping up his spine. By the third day, Daniel realized that Hale wasn't just strict, he was trapped in his own frustration. Every request felt like a test, and every movement Daniel made was watched with a scrutiny that would have sent any other assistant running. At lunch, Hale rejected the meal Daniel prepared for being too salty, though Daniel had followed the exact recipe left by the previous assistant. When Hale accused him of being careless, Daniel clenched his jaw but kept his voice calm, reminding himself that losing temper would cost him the job he desperately needed. He cleaned the plate, made a fresh meal, and placed it gently before Hale, who silently continued eating as if daring Daniel to break. That afternoon, Hale struggled with a muscle spasm in his arm and shoved Daniel's hand away when he tried to help. Daniel stepped back, giving him space, but didn't leave the room. He stood by quietly until Hale's breathing evened out again, and only then did he offer assistance. Hale refused again, the words clipped and defensive. Daniel didn't push, but he didn't retreat either, which made Hale look at him with a mixture of irritation and confusion, as if unsure why Daniel hadn't walked out like all the others. Later that evening, Hale unexpectedly snapped at Daniel for placing a file slightly crooked on the table. Daniel took a slow breath before responding, telling him calmly that he didn't scare easily and he wasn't going anywhere. Hale stared at him for a long moment, his expression tightening, something flickering beneath his composed exterior. For the first time since Daniel started, Hale didn't fire back with another harsh remark. He looked away, almost as if he was wrestling with emotions he refused to name, and Daniel continued working in quiet, determined movements, refusing to let the anger or exhaustion show on his face. On the fourth morning, Daniel woke up to a message from his usual babysitter saying she couldn't come. Panic rushed through him as he stared at the clock ticking forward, knowing he couldn't afford to be late again. With no other choice, he gently woke Lily, dressed her quickly, and rushed out the door, hoping Hale wouldn't explode when he saw a child in his strict, silent mansion. As they approached the large doors, Lily clutched Daniel's hand but looked around with bright curiosity, her tiny footsteps echoing in the vast hallway. Daniel whispered for her to stay close and be quiet, though he knew children rarely stayed quiet when they were supposed to. When they entered the study, Hale's face darkened instantly. His eyes dropped to the little girl peeking from behind Daniel's leg, and a sharp breath escaped him, the kind that usually preceded a barrage of complaints. Daniel quickly apologized and explained the situation, bracing himself for the anger he expected. But before Hale could speak, Lily stepped forward with the innocent confidence of someone who didn't know fear. She looked at Hale's wheelchair, then at his stern face, and asked if he was having a bad morning. The room went still. Daniel froze, certain this was the moment everything fell apart. But Hale didn't yell. He blinked, taken aback, the usual edge in his voice missing entirely as he muttered something about being fine. Lily didn't seem convinced. She walked closer, placing her small drawing book on his lap without hesitation. She pointed to a picture she had made, a sun, a house, and 3 stick figures holding hands, and told him that lonely houses look prettier when someone lives in them. Hale stared at the drawing longer than expected, his fingers brushing the paper as if it were something fragile. He didn't know what to say, and for the first time Daniel noticed a flicker of vulnerability in the man who always hid behind coldness and control. Throughout the morning, Lily's presence softened the mansion in ways Daniel never thought possible. She hummed while coloring in the corner, occasionally bringing her sketches to Hale, telling him stories about her school, her friends, and how she wanted to build machines when she grew up so she could help people move again. Hale watched her with a strange, quiet fascination, as though trying to remember the last time something so pure and unfiltered existed within these walls. At one point, she asked him why his eyes looked sad even though he had a big house and lots of books, and Hale seemed to struggle with the question, his mouth opening and closing without an answer. Later, while Daniel organized paperwork, he heard Hale's voice, softer than usual, asking Lily what her favorite thing in the world was. She said it was her dad because he always tried, even when he was tired. Hale glanced at Daniel with an expression that held something new, something like respect, something like recognition of another man carrying the weight of more than he showed. That afternoon, as Daniel prepared to leave, Hale unexpectedly asked if Lily would be coming again someday, his tone attempting to sound casual but failing to hide the hint of warmth beginning to break through the layers he had built around himself. On the 6th day, tension hung over the mansion like a storm waiting to break. Daniel arrived early as always, but something felt off the moment he stepped into the hallway. The house was unusually quiet, even for a place that lived in silence. When he reached Hale's room, he found the door slightly ajar, and a faint, uneven sound filtered through, a strained, shallow breathing that made Daniel's heart jolt. He pushed the door open and saw Hale slumped awkwardly in his wheelchair, his face pale, his jaw clenched tight as his muscles twisted painfully. It was the worst spasm Daniel had seen since he started, and panic flickered in Hale's eyes, a rare crack in the armor he always wore. Daniel rushed to him without hesitation, gently supporting his shoulders, trying to ease the tension seizing Hale's body. Hale tried to speak but only managed broken breaths, his voice trembling with frustration and fear he couldn't hide. When the pain intensified, he instinctively grabbed Daniel's wrist, fingers digging in as if anchoring himself to something solid. Daniel murmured reassurances, his voice low and steady, guiding Hale through slow breaths, grounding him with calm persistence. Hale fought the urge to push him away, his pride battling against the vulnerability he despised, but the pain overwhelmed everything, and for the first time, he didn't resist being helped. The doctor arrived minutes later, checking Hale's vitals and administering medication to ease the spasm. Daniel stayed by Hale's side, refusing to step back even when the doctor worked around him. As the spasms slowly loosened their grip, Hale's breathing evened out, sweat dampened his hairline, and exhaustion washed over his face. When the doctor left, Hale's gaze shifted to Daniel with a rawness Daniel had never seen before. The ever-present firmness in his expression had softened, replaced by something fragile, almost frightened. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat before finally slipping out in a quiet, fractured murmur, confessions he had never allowed himself to make. He admitted that he hated being seen like this, hated the way people looked at him with either pity or impatience, hated the way they pretended to care until the work became too heavy and they left like everyone eventually did. His voice wavered as he said he pushed every assistant away before they could fail him, because it hurt less to be the one who walked out first. Daniel listened without interrupting, sitting beside him, his presence steady and unshakable, the room thick with a silence that finally felt honest instead of cold. Hale's eyes glistened, though he blinked hard to hide it, his composure slipping in ways he couldn't control. Daniel reached out, not with pity but with simple human sincerity, telling him quietly that he didn't see a burden in him, only a man fighting battles no one else understood. Hale's mouth twitched as if trying to form a reply, his fingers slightly trembling on the armrest, and something in his posture shifted, not in resignation, but in the faint, painful relief of finally being seen. The seventh day arrived with a quiet tension floating through the mansion, as if the walls themselves were waiting to see whether Daniel would disappear like all the others who came before him. Daniel woke up early, long before the sun rose, making Lily's breakfast, ironing his shirt, and reviewing the schedule he had carefully organized the night before. This wasn't just any morning for him, it was the day he wanted to prove to Hale, and to himself, that he wasn't temporary. Lily walked beside him as they entered the mansion, her small hand swinging in his, a bright contrast to the cold marble floors. She held another little drawing for Hale, folded neatly in her backpack, hoping he might smile again the way he did the day before. Hale waited in the study, his expression unreadable as Daniel stepped inside. The usual harshness wasn't there, but neither was warmth, it was something in between, something uncertain. He looked as though he expected Daniel to hand in a resignation letter or offer an apologetic explanation, something that would fit the pattern he had grown used to. Daniel didn't say anything at first. Instead, he placed a notebook on Hale's desk, the pages filled with a full weekly plan he had created. It contained Hale's therapy schedule, the business calls he needed to make, a reorganized system for his medications, and even notes for small outdoor breaks in the garden. Hale flipped through it slowly, his eyes lingering on the details, his fingers tracing the edges as though trying to understand the amount of effort someone had willingly given to him. When Hale finally looked up, there was a flicker of disbelief in his eyes, as if he couldn't quite accept that someone had stayed long enough to plan for a future week with him. Daniel told him that he wasn't here to just follow orders, he wanted to help Hale rebuild what he had lost, day by day, if Hale allowed him to. The room went quiet, Hale's jaw tightened, and for a moment he looked away, blinking several times as if fighting emotions that had long been buried under bitterness and loneliness. When he looked back, his voice cracked slightly as he asked Daniel why he was doing this, why he hadn't run like the rest. Daniel simply replied that everyone deserved someone who didn't give up on them, especially those who had spent too long believing they were alone. Lily peeked into the room then, holding her drawing out shyly. Hale accepted it with an unsteady hand and stared at the picture she had made, a man in a wheelchair holding hands with a little girl and her father, all three standing beneath a bright yellow sun. Something in Hale's face softened in a way Daniel had never seen, a vulnerable shift breaking through the rigid shell he lived inside. He cleared his throat, trying to regain composure, but his voice still trembled as he asked Daniel if he would consider staying permanently. Daniel blinked, stunned, unsure he had heard correctly as Hale continued speaking, offering him not just a long-term position but a salary far beyond anything Daniel had ever imagined, along with help for Lily's schooling so she could pursue the future she dreamed of. The housekeeper paused at the doorway, watching with quiet surprise as Hale struggled to steady his emotions, the walls he had built over years beginning to crumble under the weight of someone finally choosing to stay. Daniel felt his throat tighten, not from the offer itself, but from the realization that this cold, isolated mansion had slowly begun to feel different over the past week, as though life had been breathed back into it, not through wealth or routine, but through understanding and presence. Lily slipped her small hand into Hale's, and he didn't pull away. Instead, his fingers closed gently around hers, his shoulders lowering as if a burden he had carried for far too long had finally eased.